Most people think neighbor disputes are loud, messy, obvious, yelling over fences, barking dogs, maybe a late-night argument that gets a little out of hand. Mine wasn't like that. Mine was quiet, slow, almost polite. And somehow, that made it worse. Because every summer, like clockwork, my neighbor moved my fence just a little bit closer to my house, and he really thought I wouldn't notice. I live in a place called Redfield County, out on the edge of a quiet subdivision that was built in the late 80s, back when people still cared about property lines and paperwork and doing things the right way. My house isn't big, never was meant to be, but the land, that's what I paid for. Every inch of that backyard is mine, documented, recorded, stamped on a plat map filed in 1988, the year the whole neighborhood was first laid out. I remember the day I bought the place, the realtor sliding that map across the table like it was nothing special, but to me it felt like a promise. This is yours. All of it. No confusion, no gray areas. The fence along the east side, that one matters more than people think. It's not pretty, not something you'd see in a magazine. Pressure-treated pine, 6 feet tall, posts set deep in concrete. I built it myself the fall after I moved in. Cold weekend, hands numb half the time, mixing concrete in a wheelbarrow and pouring 2 bags into every post hole because I didn't want it shifting, not even an inch. I didn't build it for privacy. I built it because I wanted something solid, something that said, quietly but clearly, this line right here, this is where my land ends. The surveyor who marked it out that year, his name was Carl Benson, older guy, steady hands. Didn't say much, but knew his work. He drove those markers into the ground like he'd done it 1,000 times, checked his measurements twice, then handed me the report. This line won't move, he said, almost casually. I believed him. For years, I never had a reason not to. Then came Travis. He moved in about 3 years after me, bought the place on the east side. Younger than me, maybe mid-30s, worked in some kind of sales job from what I could tell. Friendly enough at first, the kind of guy who smiles a lot, but never quite lets you see what he's thinking. First time we talked, he brought over a 6-pack, stood in my driveway talking about how he wanted to upgrade his backyard, make it more livable. I remember nodding, saying something like, yeah, it's a good space for that, and thinking nothing of it. For a while, everything was normal. We'd wave, maybe chat about the weather, complain about the HOA fees like everyone else. Then, one summer, he started building this deck. Not just a small platform or something simple. No, this thing was big. Composite boards, steel hardware, built-in lighting along the steps, even a pergola frame that stretched up like he was planning to turn the whole thing into an outdoor living room. There was a gas line too. I saw the trench he dug, running straight from his house out to the deck. I stood in my yard one evening watching the construction, hands in my pockets, just taking it in. It looked good, I won't lie. Professional. Expensive. But there was something about it that didn't sit right. The footprint. It felt too close to the fence. Not over it. Not obviously wrong. Just close enough to make you pause. I remember asking him about it one afternoon. You got permits for all that? I said, trying to keep it casual. He laughed, waved his hand like I'd asked if he'd remembered to lock his front door. Yeah, man, all squared away. Inspector already signed off on phase 1. That was enough for me at the time. I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for problems. If the county says it's fine, then it's probably fine, right? That was my first mistake. The first summer after the deck was finished, I noticed something small. So small I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The fence, it looked like it had shifted. Maybe a foot, maybe less. I stood there staring at it, trying to line it up with the edge of my driveway, with a crack in the concrete I'd memorized over the years. Something was off. I grabbed a tape measure, checked from the corner of my garage to the fence. The number didn't match what I remembered. Not exactly. But memory's a tricky thing, right? It bends, it fades, it fills in gaps. I told myself that's all it was. Still, I took a picture, just in case. Didn't say anything to Travis. Didn't knock on his door, didn't ask questions. I just went inside, saved the photo on my computer, and wrote down the date in a little notebook I keep in the kitchen drawer. Probably nothing, I told myself. Probably just me being paranoid. But something in my gut didn't agree. And that feeling, it didn't go away. The second summer is when things stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling intentional. And I remember exactly when it hit me because I had just gotten back from a work trip, 3 days in Denver. Nothing unusual, just long meetings and bad hotel coffee. And all I wanted was to get home, sit in my backyard, maybe grill something simple, and enjoy a quiet evening. But the moment I stepped out back, something felt off again, sharper this time, harder to ignore. The fence wasn't where it was supposed to be. And this time, I didn't hesitate or second-guess myself. I walked straight to the same spot by the garage, hooked the tape measure to the corner trim, pulled it tight to the fence line, and just stood there staring at the number, like maybe it would change if I blinked enough times. But it didn't. It was off by another 1.5 feet. Not maybe. Not close enough. It was off. That's when the photo from the year before came back to me, clear as day. I went inside, pulled it up on my laptop, zoomed in, compared angles, shadows, the alignment with the driveway crack, and there it was, subtle, but undeniable. The fence had moved once, and now it had moved again. I wish I could tell you I marched over there right then and confronted him, made a scene, demanded answers, but that's not who I am. I've always believed that if you're going to step into something messy, you better have your facts straight first, otherwise you just end up looking like the problem. So instead, I did the same thing I did the first time. I documented it. Photos from multiple angles, measurements written down, dates logged carefully. Calm. Methodical. Like I was building a case without fully admitting to myself that that's exactly what I was doing. Still, I couldn't ignore the thought creeping in the back of my mind. How does a fence move like that without someone knowing? A few days later, I finally ran into Travis out front. He was loading something into the back of his SUV, humming to himself like it was just another normal afternoon. I stood there for a second, debating whether to say anything, and then I figured, keep it simple. Hey, I called out, walking over. Quick question, have you noticed anything weird with the fence line between our yards? He didn't even pause, didn't even look confused, just shut the trunk and leaned against the car like we were talking about the weather. What do you mean? He said, easy, relaxed. It just looks like it might have shifted a bit, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Maybe from weather or something. He smiled, and it wasn't a nervous smile, not defensive, just smooth. Wood moves, man, he said. Heat, moisture, all that. Totally normal. I nodded slowly, like I was considering it, even though I knew that wasn't how this worked. Posts set in concrete don't just slide sideways across the ground like that. Not without effort, not without tools. Yeah, I said. Maybe. And that was it. Conversation over. He gave me a little pat on the shoulder like he'd just reassured me about something trivial, then got in his car and drove off. I stood there for a while after he left, staring at the fence again, and for the first time, I let myself think it out loud. He's doing this on purpose. The thing about that realization is, once it settles in, you start replaying everything differently. The deck being a little too close. The way he answered my question just now, too quick, too casual. The fact that both times the fence had shifted, it happened when I wasn't home. That's not weather. That's timing. And suddenly, the whole thing felt less like a misunderstanding and more like a strategy, slow, incremental, just enough each time that it might go unnoticed, or at least be hard to prove. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry, not yet, but because I was trying to figure out what kind of person does something like that, and why. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention. Not in an obsessive way, just aware. I'd glance out the window more often, take note of when he had people over, when work trucks showed up, when things in his yard changed. And the more I watched, the more I realized something else. That deck of his, the one I'd admired at first, it didn't just sit close to the fence, it seemed to depend on that space. His outdoor furniture, the grill, even the way the steps were positioned, it all assumed that extra couple of feet existed on his side. Like he'd planned for it. Like he needed it. That's when the third summer started to loom in my mind before it even arrived. Because if he'd done it twice, what was stopping him from doing it again? Winter came and went, quiet as usual, snow covering everything, smoothing out the lines between our properties like none of it mattered. But I knew better by then. I knew that once the ground thawed, once people started working outside again, that fence would become important all over again. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for it to happen a third time. Early spring, before Travis even started setting up his yard for the season, I made a call to a licensed surveyor. Not someone new, not some random company online. I tracked down a firm that had been working in Redfield County for decades. People who understood the original plat records, the kind of folks who didn't cut corners. A week later, A guy named Daniel Ortiz showed up at my property. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, sun-worn face, calm demeanor, the kind of person who doesn't waste words but doesn't miss details either. He walked the perimeter with a GPS unit and a metal detector, scanning for the original markers, occasionally stopping to brush dirt away from a spot, checking coordinates against his tablet. I followed him around for a bit, hands in my jacket pockets, watching quietly until he finally turned to me and said, "You've got a reason for calling me out here, don't you?" I hesitated for a second, then just told him. Not everything, not the full story, just enough. "I think my fence has been moved." He didn't laugh, didn't question it, just nodded once, like he'd heard that before. "Happens more than you'd think," he said. "Let's see what the ground says." That line stuck with me. Let's see what the ground says. Because unlike people, the ground doesn't lie. He worked for most of the morning, locating the original iron pins at the property corners, some buried deeper than expected, others still right where they should be. Each one he uncovered, he cleaned, photographed, logged with precise coordinates, building a map that matched, point for point, the original plat filed decades ago. Then he measured the fence. And I watched his expression change, just slightly, but enough. He didn't say anything right away, just took another measurement, then another, double-checking his numbers like a man who doesn't like being wrong. Finally, he looked up at me. "You were right to call," he said. I felt my chest tighten a little. "How bad?" He exhaled slowly, glanced back toward the fence line, then over at Travis's deck. "Your fence," he said, "is sitting about 3 feet inside your property, and that deck over there." He paused, like he was choosing his words carefully. "It's not just close to the line. It's over it, by a good 4 feet, maybe more." For a moment, everything went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind where something clicks into place and you realize you're not dealing with a misunderstanding anymore. You're dealing with something that has consequences. Real ones. I looked over at that deck again. The lights, the structure, the whole thing that had seemed so impressive before, and all I could think was, this was never built where it was supposed to be. And suddenly, all those small, careful movements of my fence made perfect sense. He wasn't just taking space. He was covering it up. I didn't say anything to Travis that day. Not after Daniel packed up his equipment. Not after he handed me the preliminary notes. Not even after I stood there alone in my backyard for a good 10 minutes, just staring at that fence line like I was seeing it for the first time. Because once you know something like that, once it's been measured, documented, confirmed, there's a certain weight to it. You don't rush it. You don't waste it on a half-baked confrontation that turns into your word against his. No. If this was going to be handled, it was going to be handled the right way. Daniel emailed me the official report 2 days later. Clean, precise, stamped and sealed. Every corner marked, every measurement accounted for, photographs attached showing the iron pins in the ground and the exact offset of my fence from the true boundary line. And right there, in plain language, it stated what we both already knew. The adjacent structure, Travis's deck, extended approximately 4 feet and 3 inches over the legal property boundary. 4 feet, 3 inches. Not an accident. Not a rounding error. That's a decision. I printed the report that same morning, slid it into a folder, and drove down to the county building department. The place looked exactly like you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a front desk with a stack of forms that all looked slightly outdated. There's something oddly comforting about that kind of place, because it means rules exist, and more importantly, they get enforced. A woman at the counter, her name tag said Linda, took my folder and flipped through it slowly, her expression shifting the further she got. "Did you already speak with your neighbor about this?" she asked, not accusatory, just procedural. I shook my head. No. I wanted to make sure I had everything documented first. She gave a small nod, like she respected that. "All right, we'll pull the original permit and take a look." I filled out a formal encroachment complaint right there at the counter, signed it, dated it, and handed it back. And just like that, it was no longer just my problem. It was on record. The waiting part, that's always the hardest. You go from having control, gathering evidence, making decisions, to just waiting for someone else to move the process forward. Days passed, then a week, then another few days after that, and I started to wonder how long these things usually take, whether anything would actually come of it. Then, 11 days after I filed the complaint, I came home from work and saw a county vehicle parked outside Travis's house. I didn't go over. I didn't need to. I could see enough from my yard. Two inspectors, clipboards in hand, walking the perimeter of his deck, measuring, pointing, taking photos. Travis was out there with them, arms crossed, posture stiff, talking. No, not talking, explaining. You could tell by the way he moved, sharp gestures, quick responses, like he was trying to stay ahead of something that had already caught up to him. At one point, one of the inspectors stepped back, looked directly at the fence line, then down at his notes, then back at Travis, and even from a distance, I could see it in his face. That moment when the story stops working. Later that evening, after the inspectors had left, Travis finally came over. No smile this time. No casual tone. He stopped a few feet from the fence, hands on his hips, staring at me like he was trying to decide how this conversation was going to go. "You filed a complaint?" he said. I didn't play dumb. "Yeah." He let out a short laugh, but there was nothing funny about it. "You could have just talked to me." I tilted my head slightly. "I did. Last summer. You told me would moves." That landed. You could see it. For a second, he didn't say anything, just looked away, jaw tight, then back at me. "It's not over the line," he said, more firmly now. "The permit was approved." I nodded toward the fence. "The survey says it is. By over 4 feet. He shook his head, pacing a step or two like that might help him reset the situation. "Surveys can be wrong. County seems to trust this one," I replied. There was a pause then, longer this time. The kind where both people know the direction things are heading, but one of them hasn't accepted it yet. "You have any idea what that deck cost me?" he asked, his voice lower now. I met his eyes. "Probably about 40 grand. Another pause. Then he said it, almost under his breath, like he couldn't quite believe he was saying it out loud. "They're telling me I might have to tear part of it down." "Not part," I said quietly. "Everything past the property line." That's when the frustration finally broke through. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaled hard, looked back at his deck like it had betrayed him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "It's a couple feet." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't step closer. Just stood there, steady. "It's my couple feet." He didn't have an answer for that. Over the next few weeks, things moved fast. Official notice of violation was issued, written clearly, no room for interpretation. The structure was not compliant with the approved permit, it encroached on neighboring property, and it had to be brought into compliance, which, in this case, meant removal of the entire section that crossed the boundary, followed by reinspection before any rebuild. There's something surreal about watching consequences unfold in real time, especially when they've been building quietly for so long. One morning, I woke up to the sound of power tools. I stepped outside with my coffee, and there it was, a crew dismantling Travis's deck piece by piece. The pergola frame came down first, then the railings, then the boards themselves, stacked in neat piles like they were trying to preserve some dignity in the process. Travis was there the whole time, standing off to the side, arms crossed again. But this time there was no argument left in him. Just silence. At one point, he glanced over at me. Not angry. Not even resentful. Really. Just tired. I gave a small nod. Not friendly, not unfriendly. Just acknowledgement. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about winning. It was about a line. One that had been there long before either of us moved in. One that didn't shift just because someone decided it was inconvenient. By the end of the week, the deck was gone. Or at least, the part that had never belonged there in the first place. The remaining structure sat awkwardly against the corrected boundary, smaller now, contained. And the fence? I moved it back, right where it was always supposed to be. Set it properly, checked against the survey markers, made sure it lined up down to the inch. Same as I did the first time all those years ago. Travis and I, we don't talk anymore. Haven't since that day. Some people might say that's the worst part, that it's a shame things ended that way, that maybe it could have been handled differently. But honestly, the quiet suits me just fine. Still, I think about it sometimes. Not the deck, not the money, but the choices. Because this whole thing didn't start with a lawsuit or a complaint or even a survey. It started with a decision to take a little, then a little more, then a little more again, assuming no one would push back. And I guess the real question is, where do you draw the line? Not just with property, but with people. Because if I hadn't noticed, if I hadn't documented it, if I'd just let it slide, would he have stopped? Or would that line have kept moving until there was nothing left of it at all? I'm curious what you think. Was I right to go straight to the county instead of trying to work it out one more time? Or should neighbors handle things differently before it gets to that point? Let me know in the comments. I read more of them than you'd probably expect.